possible, keep voters in the ward that they are currently residents of. And we also kind of developed a comprehensive plan for community engagement. I'll get into that on the next slide. But before we move on, I want to stress that we have not formally considered a new map. Our intention is to go through this public engagement process first, to talk about criteria that we should be considering, and to talk about, when we look at how to redraw the margins, redraw the borders for the 6th Ward and the 7th Ward, to look at that map and say, hey, this makes sense to keep this block over here or this block over there. We want to go through that public engagement process first before this committee would put pen to paper and draw a new map. Okay, next slide. So we kicked this process off with some community-wide town halls in July, one in English, one in Spanish. And then for the next several months, this will take us through January of next year, we are having these public engagement sessions at scheduled community meetings. So then early next year, after we've gone through this public engagement process, the committee will draft several maps, maybe one map, maybe two, maybe three, depends on where the community engagement takes us. And then we will release some proposed maps, proposed map or maybe several maps. We're scheduling that for February of next year for an additional round of public engagement, public comment. And our target is to have this committee finally recommend a new map at our April meeting, and then present that to the City Council for approval in May of 2023. And that is almost as early as we can accomplish this goal. We don't want to do it any earlier than the municipal election in April of next year, because two of our council member colleagues that have been appointed are up for re-election in April of next year. And so we don't want to confuse folks by redrawing the borders before that election. We want that election to take place with the current map, and then everyone on the council and everyone in the community will know in May of 2023 what the next election will look like, what the wards for the next election will look like, and the whole community will be on the same page then at that point. So that is the overall plan, and if we could move on to the next slide, just looking at our public engagement schedule, we're here in October for Ward 6 and 7, and by the end of January, we will have done a session for all 9 wards. If you're here tonight, you're aware of this, please spread the word. Nick, moving on. So what I would like to do now is take a deeper dive and look at the 6th Ward in some detail, and we'll take a look at the demographics of the 6th Ward, and then we will kind of open up the floor for discussion. So kind of recapping what we saw in that earlier slide and focusing on the 6th Ward here, we see that the 6th Ward is oversized by 282 voters, 3.3%. That is fairly close to par. So let's be thinking about that as we move forward. And as we shift population here from ward to ward, in an effort to ideally achieve a zero deviation, you can see, looking at this map of all of the wards, that it's not going to be as easy as moving some of the extra 3rd Ward population, to the 5th Ward, for example. Unfortunately, the numbers don't line up for this to be quite that easy. So, we do have some wards that may be fairly close to par, but they need to gain some territory on one side and lose some territory on the other side in order for us to get where we need to go with all 9 wards. 6th Ward is unique in that it only borders one other ward. So the 6th Ward conversation might be one of the simplest conversations we have. If we look at the 7th Ward, the neighbor of the 6th Ward, the 7th Ward is also oversized by a slightly larger amount. So it might end up being the case that in order to get the 6th Ward closer to 0, we take some of that territory, move it to the 7th Ward, but then move more of the 7th Ward to the 1st and the 5th. Again, we are not jumping to conclusions at this point, but want to take some public input and see what residents and stakeholders have to say. If we could move on to the next slide, taking a look at the demographics of Ward 6, the population overall has remained fairly constant. We've only added 9 people to the 6th Ward in the last 10 years, at least according to the census data. But the relative size has changed. 10 years ago, the 6th Ward was 8.2% above average. Other wards have grown in size more significantly, so the 6th Ward is now only 3.3% above average. It continues to be a majority white ward, less so than it was 10 years ago, with a decline in the white population and growth in minority populations, especially the Hispanic and Latino populations, and the census category of individuals identifying as 2 or more races is up across the board as well. So next slide there, and then again looking at this is the same graph as before, but presented now to take a little bit closer look at the 6th Ward. You know, we see graphically here that the minority population of the 6th Ward has increased, but the overall population has remained almost identical. And ideally, when we rebalance, you know, all wards would reach exactly to that red line, no more, no less. So quick, if you want to take a deeper dive into this presentation is posted on the committee's website, but I think we can move to the next page there, and then a closer look, not super high resolution of 6th Ward ethnic distribution. A little bit more blue, green, and red dots there than there used to be 10 years ago. Then moving on to the next page, Nick. This is the meat of the conversation right now. Keeping in mind that Ward 6 is oversized by 282 people. Ward 5 is the only ward that actually borders, I'm sorry, Ward 7 is the only ward that borders Ward 6. Just so we have the numbers in front of us, since the 5th Ward is close, I put those numbers in there as well, so we can keep that into context. But what I would like to do now, and actually, Nick, if I could have the mouse. It still reaches. Yep. And I did have 3 people for public comment. Okay, there we go. So I will use the mouse to kind of point where people are talking about. And so let's open it up for public comment now. Nick, I guess I have the mouse, so I need to do that. Just click it off of there so you can. Oh, I look at this. I'm sorry, I'm going to turn the mouse back in there. You can drive. You wanted to highlight this area? Well, I want to highlight wherever people want to talk about. Okay. So let's go to public comment. The people signed up for public comment are Tina Payton, Priscilla Giles, and Carla Sutton. Tina, Priscilla, and Carlos. So Tina, let's start a public comment with Tina Payton. And again, let's try and focus conversation on the 6th Ward and what we might want to consider as we try and get that plus 282 number down to as close to 0 as possible. So Tina, you have the floor.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So I was mentioning in the last meeting that you had that since the 5th Ward is negative 705 people, that you should consider taking part of the 7th ward and 6th ward and putting it towards the 5th ward. Then as far as fair and equitable, and to continue to, as you said, you wanted to, your goal was to have more mixed wards or not predominantly white wards, then which 6 and 7 are, then move 6 parts of 6 and 7 to 5.
Okay. So Tina, if we're talking specifically about Ward 6,
right?
What?
So if you move part of 7,
yeah, if you look at where Nick is kind of helping you out with the mouse
right,
there.
so
if we're talking
this
about that,
is what I'm saying. So if you move, because 6 only borders 7, so the only way
right.
to move it to 5 would be to take part of 7 and 6.
Right, or maybe move some of 6 to 7 and then move some of 7 to 5.
No, because you just said you wanted to not have so many white people in one ward, so put 6 and 7 towards 5, and then you can reduce the number for both wards. That's what we're talking about tonight, right?
Right, and keeping in mind that we need to make sure that wards are contiguous, which means that every part of the 6th ward needs to be accessible to every other part of the 6th ward without crossing through another ward.
Right, but if you make Ward 7, just what I said, in the pink right here, see, right here down McCormick. So then you start talking about Simpson and so forth, that's Ward 7, make that number 5. And then you can start going into Ward 6 and make that number 5 too.
Right, so you're talking about the portion of the 6th ward, which is south of Simpson, between Simpson and Elgin Road or Gulf Road, to make that, to move that into Ward 5, perhaps.
Yes, and same.
Right.
Same with in 6. So both of them will be Ward 5.
Got it. Okay. All right, any other, before we move on from Tina, do you have any other suggestions with regards to Ward 6?
Well, only 6 borders 7. So I strongly, if we're down 705 people, 8.1%, that's a lot, and you have 3.3 surplus, don't move it to 7 because you already have a surplus in 7. So move part of 6 and part of 7 into 5. It only is, you're talking about fair, transparent, you don't want predominantly white, which 6 and 7, you just showed the graph like 3,000 times. We talked about this last time. Move 6 and 7 into 5. You can do that by this cutting off right here some lines. So it wouldn't be that 6 is jumping over to 5 if you put 7 into 5 at this where they meet, and then you couldn't put 6 into 5 because that part of 7 would be 5th ward. So then you would have 6 into 5th ward as well. You can cut a line somewhere.
Okay. Thanks, Tina. We're going to have a separate discussion on Ward 7, which is a little bit more complex than Ward 6, since there's only one border here. So let's move on to Ms. Giles, if you want to talk about the 6th ward here, and then Mr. Sutton.
Yes, I have maybe a different opinion of this, but I feel like the 6th ward did have more of a Black population, and they were moved to the 5th ward. that was intentional. So that there was so that was mixed. There was really no Black neighborhood, and you're trying to keep from having an all Black or an all white neighborhood. But I feel like, well, first of all, let me say that the city or the 9 or the people behind the 9 on the dais, they're making it difficult to impossible for the transparency that you repute to have. You don't really want people to comment because there are only 3 people commenting tonight. I don't know how many people are watching. The Zoom link and the computer are something that people just don't have in order to contribute to this discussion. And you only have one, I see, from February to April, where the community will have an input. And it seems like you already have decided it. We should not have to download anything to be a part of a city meeting that affects all the residents of Evanston. People don't even know what the city has in store for them. We do not need redistricting, although it seems to be already decided. The ward should reflect its residents, not politics. This is not the Senate or the House of Representatives where we need to have an equal number of representation for voting. I feel like people should, again, I'm going to say that the wards should reflect its residents, not politics. Thank you. When you're talking about 6th and 5th and those wards, people live near where they wanted to live and exclude the people they don't want.
Thank
I don't
you
know
for
what
your
else.
comment.
Yeah.
Thank you for your, do you have anything else?
I just feel like, I mean, the 5th ward is, well, each ward has its historical, they each have their historical basis, and this is destroying it.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your comments. Mr. Sutton is next.
Good evening. I would like to just follow up on some of the suggestions made by Mrs. Payton and Mrs. Giles. As Mrs. Giles mentioned, our family started in the 6th ward and we were removed from there in the 1920s. So I'm looking at the boundaries here. It seems like you could go down Grant Street all the way to McDaniel, or possibly all the way over to Bennett, and add that in to the 5th ward. At the time right now, since the Blacks in the 5th ward is only a group that are losing population, it would not have an adverse effect on the voting power of the whites in those now existing communities, other than 6 and 7 would then be considered part of 5. At the rate we're going now, it's going to be very difficult to balance any war with a predominant group with the effect of gentrification and marginalization that has occurred over the years. Traditionally, it was redlined. Now I'm asking you to, since our ward has had a significant decrease in population, add that particular area from Grant, possibly over to Bennett, into the 5th ward. And for 2 other reasons. I think it would help the marginalization of the 5th wards and ease up on the double standards that we have been victim to over the years by ward borderlines. And also, I'm looking for better services, and also the voting population will not be adversely affected by adding those portions of the 7th ward and the 6th ward into the 5th ward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. Is there anybody else who wants to weigh in on the 6th ward redistricting here?
Yeah,
Councilmember.
Mr. Chair, I think I would like to.
Yeah, go ahead, Councilmember Sufferton.
Yeah, so since the housing stock is single family houses largely, and there's no planned developments that'll lead to an increase in population. The thing that may make the most sense would be to increase the pain, noise, and grant piece of the 7th ward. If you did that along McDaniel, that may get you to right about where the mouse is there.
Yeah.
So, and then, to Mr. Sutton's point, from there, I mean, that would get the 6th ward balance population wide, and then from there, we could make the adjustments or consider the adjustments that he brought up along grants, and maybe it is all the way to Bennett. I don't know what the population numbers would be if you did that. The one thing I will note is one of the largest population centers of the 6th ward is 3 Crowns, which is right on the eastern border of the 6th ward. So if you're going to do anything that would include that, you may be overshooting the 282 number you're looking for. But beyond that, unless we want to be very creative and have wards that have tentacles that extend, there's not much you can do with the 6th ward since it's all determined by the city boundaries.
Right. And so just let me make sure I understood what you were saying, Councilmember Suffren, is that if we did need to take some blocks away from the 6th ward in order to get that number to 0, you're suggesting, and Nick, can you show the mouse here, between Grant and Payne and on the north and south, and Pioneer and McDaniel, like those?
Well, it's not a suggestion. What I'm saying is if the intention of the finished product is to bring the 5th ward further west, if you do anything on the north end by Isabella, that's just trading between 6 and 7. There's no
right.
But if when this process is complete and we're trying to balance population, the place where you're going to get the most ability to make adjustments will be that area that I brought up.
Right.
But with the way that it's set up with this municipal boundaries, there's not a lot of play on the north side. I think if we're going to look at a more I don't know what you talked about in the other discussions. I mean, if the 5th ward is going to come into what is now the 7th ward more, then some of that 6th ward has to go into 7 to balance that out, I think. And
exactly, I think that might be the case. And we're going to have we have not yet had our 5th ward meeting. That one is scheduled for January to look at 5th ward exclusively. So right now we're just talking about hypothetical possibilities. Let's also keep in mind that one of the factors that would seem reasonable to continue considering as we're drawing ward boundaries is the geographic boundary represented by the channel. And so that, would make it, we would be contravening that indication if we extended wards, across the channel, just a few blocks here, a few blocks there.
Yeah. If I may, the other thing I'll say, this Payne is not a busy street where you would expect a ward boundary. Grant probably makes more sense. Like Grant and McDaniel are 2 significant, by the standards of suburban traffic streets. Having split representation on one, Eleanor and I both get this sometimes with people on Pioneer or Payne who reach out to one or the other of us because they assume that they're in the wrong ward. If it were to
Yeah.
be, Grant and McDaniel, between Three Crowns, the amount of land that's taken up by Lincolnwood School and the Forest Reserve, you would
Mhm.
minimize that, people on one side of the street are represented, are in one ward, and people on the other side of the street are in a different ward dynamic. But again, I mean, like there's not, I just I don't know that there's enough play with the way that the map's drawn, unless we want to, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't be more radical in our redistricting, but if we're going to keep similar composition, like the only real part that'll get you more options later, I think, is that area between Payne and Grant along McDaniel.
Along Payne and, yeah. Right in
Like, I
there.
mean, I think that's because to your point about the canal, I
Right.
mean, like, I think that's the only place that there's like
That would make sense. Now, theoretically,
functional slack.
yeah, Tom, if you go north a little bit to Harrison, and where it jets off on an angle.
Yeah.
If
Now
if the line came down Walnut and then went west on Central down to Elm and gave those two blocks where you can see the word Harrison, and those two blocks went to the 7th Ward, what impact would that have?
The only thing I would caution about that is the way that the boundary is with Hartree, and like where Pioneer and Hartree come together. There's the two SSAs along Central Street. There's the two business districts with the multifamily residential between between Hartree and like Ewing. It starts a little bit before Ewing, but so I would be careful if you're playing around with Central Street, because those are multi-unit buildings. And again, like if you move that line over to Elm, you may lob off substantially more than the 282 you're looking for.
Got it. And you mentioned SSAs. I think that is another factor to consider when we're drawing maps, like a legitimate, kind of political boundary that exists. And in an ideal world, different boundaries line up and are contiguous.
Yeah, I mean, just for all those reasons, I think like what makes the most sense is that area up north. But I mean, if when this thing is done, or as it becomes more complete, if there's more moving pieces, then maybe it does make sense to take a look at things on the northern end.
Yeah.
But as it stands now, there's just not a lot of room there.
Got it. And it's the desire of the committee to end up with a map that is cleaner than our current map. Our current map isn't terrible compared to some congressional districts, but we don't want to get too creative.
Yeah, and the other thing, just there's a small park that doesn't show up on the map on Harrison between Pioneer and Hartree. So if we're looking at balancing those types of facilities, we'd have to take that into consideration as well.
Great. All right. Anything else, Tom?
No, I think that's it. I look forward to hearing how you're going to put this puzzle together.
All right, thanks. Is there anybody else who wants to weigh in on the 6th Ward?
Hi, this is Carl. Can I speak right now?
Yeah, Carl, go ahead.
Okay, so I've been using a website called davesredistricting.org. It's a free website that you can use to kind of figure out, using the demographics to figure out ward boundaries. And I don't think that seeing what we see on the screen now is very helpful, because you have to take into consideration that the 6th and 7th ward both have population 282 and 368, but both the
Mhm.
5th ward and the 1st ward need to gain population. So,
Yeah.
so what I thought is that, I know we're talking about the 6th ward now. I actually got, by drawing a map, I got to the 6th ward population to 0%, like, you know, at 0, like it's at the goal. And the way you can do that is that you can actually divide the 6th and 7th ward along, so that each one goes east-west. And I know that later you want to talk about the 7th ward, but I think that keeping most of Northwestern University in one ward would be a good thing. And then by doing that, you gain the 1st ward could gain population by gaining part of the northern half of the Northwestern campus, and then the 6th ward could go up, you know, towards Central, and then hook around and then pick up, you know, kind of down by the Civic Center. And that way, all of the Central Streets SSA is all in one ward. That could be 7th ward on the top part, and then the 6th ward could be the southern part. And I agree that having ward boundaries and alleys is more ideal than running down streets, because it's not a good thing to have. It's confusing to have people on one side of the street in one ward and another on the other side. So yeah, that's my comment.
Thanks, Carl.
Chair, if you wouldn't
but-
mind, I think also what would be helpful is to put up on the screen, even if for a moment, the goals of this committee, because I've heard a few times goals that I don't agree are a part of what we're supposed to be looking at when we're thinking
Sure.
through redistricting. So can we
Yeah.
please
Let's
refer
up.
back
It's
to
in
those goals?
Yes, in 17. No, 12. Is this what you were talking about, Councilmember Burns?
No, there's another sheet that went more into the criteria. This way was this. This isn't it. Yeah, I think this is sort of it. Communities of interest. Yeah.
Or are
this
you
is,
talking about the?
we had another list that was for us. Some of that, what I just saw on that list was on our list, but I feel like we created a list for this to guide this redistricting committee as we work with the community to think through. Like I know communities of interest was on there, minimization of voter confusion. I don't know if this might be it, but I thought there were some other things that we.
This was it, or if it wasn't exactly what you're thinking of, it's pretty darn close.
This is close though, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to point out that this idea that the redistricting process is supposed to, change wards from majority African American to majority white or majority African American wards I don't think is a part of what I see here, unless I'm mistaken. And so I just want to make sure that we're all referring to the same guiding criteria as we have this discussion. And I agree with Carl. I think then a larger map of all of Evanston and with all of the percentages is probably a bit more helpful as we think through even the 6th and 7th wards. Yeah, I think this map.
We always, and that's why I want to make sure we always start the conversation with that. But as we focus on an individual ward, since we have decided to pursue a kind of an incremental approach, we need to kind of zoom in and see what blocks need to be moved from one ward to another. But yeah, that is the big overall picture there. And so if we're going to get Ward 6 down closer to 0, some of that has to go to Ward 7 because we have no other place to move it, which makes 7 even bigger, and some more of 7 somewhere else would have to go to the 1st Ward and the 5th Ward. So, that's why we are intending to kind of take a methodical approach, look at wards as they border each other, and that's kind of the focus of these public engagement sessions. And then once we've done that for all the wards, we'll have all the information we need to make an attempt at drawing some new maps. I don't think it would be effective use of community time if we attempted to draw a map in real time at this stage in the process. And as we look at this map, let's just as a point of clarification, the green boundary, if you follow the channel up to the north boundary of Evanston, that shows up in green. That's green because it's park. That's not green because it's Fifth Ward. A little bit confusing there.
I would like the opportunity to try and make sure that this.
This is Priscilla. May I speak?
Just 1 minute.
Okay,
Council Cummings is gonna speak, and then we'll go back to Priscilla.
Okay.
So comments by Councilmember Suffredin, as well as both Ms. Payton and Mr. Sutton, make this an interesting piece of conversation to determine whether this is considered contiguous
Right.
with the Fifth Ward, and I would like the opportunity to
Okay.
help you guys
Yeah.
make that determination, because I, like you, think that this natural boundary of the channel cuts off the Fifth Ward
Mm-hmm.
from Sixth. Yes, but that's also a
Yeah.
man-made border. However, if this portion of 7 is actually part of 5, and it's no longer
Yeah.
not contiguous. So I have to do some research. I've been looking up, trying to see if there's any case law about it here, but I'd like the opportunity to research that further.
Okay. Could everybody on the phone hear that
no,
on the Zoom? Council Cummings is going to do some research into case law and look into the extent to which the channel, and or McCormick Boulevard constitute boundaries that would impact the definition of contiguous. And so, Ms. Giles, you
yes.
wanted to speak again. Please go
Yeah,
ahead.
the canal and McCormick Boulevard are natural boundaries, for the city. But if one is, Ward 1 is losing population, has lost population, it just looks like it would be just easy to move Ward 1 over to 7, as far east as it goes. And that would enlarge Ward 1 and decrease the amount that you have in Ward 7. And if, as it was before, Church Street was part of Ward 5 to the, I guess that's the railroad track. That was how it was before. No, I'm not talking about there. I'm talking about farther south. Church Street.
Yeah, Church
Where-
Street. Councilmember.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where, that's not Church. That's Church,
is
down farther south.
down farther, right there.
That's
Yeah.
Church, that's Church Street. And that was Ward 5 before, and if it just went back all the way over, then that would keep, as you're saying, you're trying to, on one of these slides, people, this is for the demographics of this map for the city, that would do that, take care of that. I don't think that you're going to get until people change their mind about living with other races. You're not going to get zero unless you change the minds of those people. I just feel like that was Ward 5 before, and it could be. I was in Ward 2 when I moved in the same place where I live now, but
And
that's okay.
to
But
clarify, what we're looking for at the end of this process is that number that now says 20.4%. Like, we want to get that down to as close to 0 as possible. And that's just looking at numbers.
no,
Separately,
I'm not looking, well, you're looking at numbers, but you said you were looking at demographics. You're looking at the
yeah.
population
So
of the
separately-
people. I'm
Right,
sorry.
so separately, when we get to the end of this process,
It sounds
the
like it's
intention
already
of the-
made.
very far from that. When we get to the end of this process, the intention of this committee, or the desire of this committee, is that we will continue to have 3 wards that are majority non-white. And so that gets into the demographic question you're talking about.
I don't know if that's gonna be, I mean,
I'm
because the
gonna-
neighborhoods are changing daily, weekly. I mean,
Yeah. So
gentrification is
if
is taking care
if
of
there's
that.
anybody else who wants to weigh in specifically on Ward 6, now's the time. If not, we're going to move on and have a similar discussion about Ward 7, which is going to be more interesting, or at least more complicated. Okay, let's move on to Ward 7, and here we go. So Ward 7 is oversized by 4.2% in actual numbers. It's oversized by 368 people. And so we need to make Ward 7 smaller. Let's also note that Ward 7 is kind of the most sprawled out ward as well. Not to the extent that it would be, unacceptable, but if, in our desire to kind of clean this map up and make it simpler, if there's a way we can make Ward 7 more compact, that's an ideal outcome of this process. So where are we going to get population? Where is Ward 7 going to give population? Now, obviously, Ward 1 and Ward 5. There might need to be some trade-off with Ward 6 to get Ward 6 where it needs to go, but obviously, we're going to have to give portions of Ward 7 to the 1st Ward and the 5th Ward. So I'd just like to run through the demographics of Ward 7 if we can move forward. Ward 7 has grown by a total of 345 people. It has lost white population, gained non-white population. And there is, again, same picture as before. We see an increased minority population and an increased population overall. And we're going to have to make Ward 7 smaller. The Hispanic population in Ward 7 has also increased. I think we can move through that one. And so now let's have our Ward 7 discussion and talk about what we might want to consider as we look to make Ward 7 smaller by a total of 368 people, ideally.
The fact that Ward 7 is split up by the channel.
Yeah, so Council Cummings is noting that the 7th Ward is split by the channel. And so Council Cummings is going to do some research there to see what that might mean for this process moving forward. My operating assumption at this point is that we're totally allowed to do that.
So if we were allowed to do it in 7, that's what I'm saying, like, if we're allowed to do it here in the central part of 7.
Yeah.
Why couldn't this, if that's what the committee decided to do?
Right. I think my understanding is we could, but having just one little chunk of the 7th Ward west of the channel be part of Ward 5 doesn't feel right.
Forget the last guy that made public comment. It wasn't really clear, but he made it seem like he would be drawing like a line right here.
Yeah. Carl Klein suggested orienting 6-7 east
Can
rather than
I
having them.
respond to Council Cummings?
Sure, go ahead.
So my suggestion, now that we can see the more of the context, was the southern part of 7 that's pink, that includes the lagoon on Northwestern campus, would become part of 1. And then 7 would then go east-west, the entire northern part of the city. And the boundary between 6 and 7 would be the alley just north of Lincoln or Harrison.
Hold on a second. I'm taking some notes here as we're going through. So Carl is saying the southern portion of Northwestern campus would be shifted to Ward 1. Also, Carl, as I'm sure you're aware, there's not much population represented in what looks like a fairly big chunk of territory there.
Actually not
But
true,
there is
because
some.
there's Elder Hall and there are several dorms and sororities, fraternities on the northern part of the campus, which do have a significant population.
Yeah,
And if you go back to the previous slide, you can see that the racial demographics of the Ward 7 in a very, there's a cluster right there, and that's a dorm. That's a cluster of dorms that provides the diversity for the 7th Ward.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. All right. So Carl is suggesting moving the southern half of the Northwestern campus from the 7th Ward to the 1st Ward. And then what was the second part of your suggestion?
well, I mean, I don't
Moving
want to be making these suggestions. I think we should be making a concerted effort to talk to Northwestern students to see if they want to be in, have their campus split in two, or if they want to have it in one ward, which it was historically before. I think they're residents of the city and we should honor their opinion as well. So I don't want to speak on their behalf, but I'm just trying to think of how we can make the population work.
Thanks. You mentioned the alley. I want to make sure I understand what you were suggesting about drawing the border in the alley.
If it's clear, I can send you a map, a link to the map that I did on Dave's redistricting. I'll send it to the committee so that you can see it.
Sure.
Excuse me, Alderman. I have this is Tina.
Okay, let's talk. We're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Tina. We're talking about Ward 7 here, so go ahead.
That's correct. So, so I understand, you know, what Carol is saying, but I still feel, and kind of what Mr. Sutton is saying. I still feel strongly about this Simpson and Payne and Noise in 6 and 7 moving to 5. And so the reason here we say, and I think to answer also Councilmember Burns, there is the part that talks about having 3 wards all non-white. And as we can see, once again, that 6 and 7 are predominantly white. And if you move that part of 7 that abuts 6 and move them both into 5, this here, where 7 abuts McCormick. So I believe still that piece should go into there, and then you can take the piece, because what you're doing, if you're saying move 6 to 7, well, you're moving white people to white people, right? And that's what you just said you kind of didn't want to do. Once again, we know the bottom line about redistricting comes to voting. That's the bottom line of the whole thing. Not, but you're saying we want to make equal, fair, transparent, and all this. Then cut it off, set down here next to Ward 5, and put the people from 7 down there, and put the people from 6, and make that whole section there 5. You can balance it off, and ward the other wards can take off of what we discussed last time. and we were supposed to have a conversation about 5 the last meeting, but it was canceled. So now it's way down in January.
Yeah,
So,
we're gonna have it, yeah, we're addressing Ward 5 at a meeting, is it January 24th
yeah,
or January
well,
10th?
but it was supposed to be the last meeting, which was canceled.
Yeah,
So I'm suggesting again, because we were supposed to talk about Ward 5 last time. So now we're talking about 6 and 7, and I'm still saying 6 and 7 should go into 5.
okay.
If you're
Got it.
talking about fair and equal and all of that.
I'm gonna recognize, Council Cummings here.
I just want to remind the committee of their goals of communities of interest in traditional Evanston neighborhoods as well. And so as you're looking at this larger map and you're looking at the borders, it may make more sense of those communities in interest to, sorry, the last commenter, said we need to recognize Northwestern students.
Carl Klein.
Carl. That's a community of interest. So that makes that suggestion goals with the committee. So some of the other suggestions may be good ones, but you have to understand whether those communities of interest are worth it. And I think looking at historical maps, even this piece of 7 that's cut between 5 and 1 probably would also be
Right. Exactly. Is there anybody else who wants to weigh in specifically on the 7th Ward? And I'm looking at Councilmember Ravel here.
Well, excuse me, before you, I'm sorry, Councilmember. Didn't you have a map last time where it had the actual numbers of the areas? So
I'm not,
you had I thought you had the actual numbers, so you could say, okay, Simpson Street has 300 people in this part or
yeah,
whatever. I thought you had
that level of data we've never looked at that in committee. Mr. Klein referred to that, to a free website called davesredistricting.org. And if you go into that website and zoom in, you can see there are 100 people in this block and 150 people in that block, if that's what you're asking for.
Yes.
We have not looked at that in this committee.
Maybe next time that would be helpful, what Carl suggested with that, because then you could know how many people you're trying to move and by block.
Yeah. We are 100% for sure going to be getting there eventually. The process we have set out is to kind of get some qualitative input first, and then once all that input is received, then look at the numerical numbers, because we do have to look at everything as a whole. But we obviously will need to be looking at those numbers when we get to it. So I'm going to recognize Councilmember Ravel. Dylan, if you want to join us closer to the microphone.
So 2 general observations about the 7th Ward. It is very, very spread out. As I discovered early in my tenure, actually before I was actually sworn into the city council, I walked, it took 2 different trips, but, you know, to walk all the way through the ward over to the McCormick intersection is one giant walk, and then another giant walk down to the Clark Street Beach, basically. So it's really spread out. So it would make sense to try to shrink it somehow. And the idea of Carl Klein's to maybe move that the lakefront campus of Northwestern into the 1st Ward would be one way to deal with that. And then the other general observation I would make is that the canal, and particularly the golf course area, is it doesn't really divide the 2 neighborhoods. It's it's kind of a focus of common interest, and particularly along the golf course. The residents on both sides of the golf course do a lot of volunteering, and so it's kind of a joint,
It's a community of
It's a
interest.
community of interest on
right,
both
yeah,
sides.
right, yeah. So I guess my simplistic idea would be to have some of the most eastern blocks of the Sixth Ward become part of the Seventh Ward in order to take some population from the Sixth Ward, but then give a big chunk perhaps of the northwestern campus. If we gave that to the First Ward, that would presumably take quite a few residents out of the Seventh Ward.
Right, at the south side, I'm
Right.
pointing to it right here, but Nick, the south, keep going down south, those 2 blocks at the south end of campus,
They're dorms.
that's what Carl was saying, that those are dorms, keep going down, right there. Yeah, and move those to the First Ward.
Right, well, I think when he's talking about dorms, I mean, because there are some east of Sheridan there too.
Right.
I'm not sure they're heavily represented on voting day in election, but I guess in terms of redistricting, that we're not looking at voting population, we're looking at residential population, right?
I have a question for Council Cummings,
Mhm.
with regards to the students, and where the census counts them
Mhm.
compared to where they're registered to vote.
Interesting question. That's something I have to look into.
So, Sharon Newsom, I think I have the answer.
Just want to say, Council Cummings has the floor, then we'll go to Carl.
Let's see if Carl has an answer.
All right,
I think
Nick
that,
is deferring to Carl.
I think that the United States government, when it requests people to fill out the census, it was asking where people were living as of April 1st, 2020. I think that was the date, April 1st. And due to COVID, most people on Northwestern campus returned home and were going virtually, attending classes virtually. So there was some debate over was their residency technically in Evanston or wherever it was they were when they got the census mailed to them.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some debate over that, if where people were residing as of that like date that the government was trying to make the count.
Right. Yeah, but even if they were living on campus, they may still be registered to vote back in Maryland or wherever.
But I think Carl is right. The census is asking where you live
Mm-hmm.
and
As
not
of that.
necessarily where you vote.
Exactly.
Where you live.
Exactly. And so we're obligated to draw our map based on where people reported they lived. Those are the census data that we're working with. We have no other choice
Right,
but to use that data.
yeah.
If we're contemplating voting patterns, however, that does not line up identically with population data.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
For the reason Carl just stated, some people may have not been on campus when they otherwise would have been.
I mean, incidentally, to your point, the census does count where you live. It doesn't, but it does impact voting. Even though it doesn't take into account where you are registered to vote.
Right.
Right.
The thing
Yeah,
about college students, even me as a transplant to the Chicagoland area, registered to vote in Chicago because I spent most of my voting time in Chicago. My permanent residence was not Chicago, living in a dorm. So, how the census would count that is completely different. Unfortunately, we are setting people up to vote in a municipal election based upon where they live.
Right, which is not necessarily where they're gonna vote.
Correct.
And, you might, I know, this is getting much too fine a point, but the fact that the first ward is down 591, and many of those that might be because of
Mhm.
Carl's point, that the census was taken on April 1st, 2020,
Mhm.
when many of those Northwestern students who might live in the first ward were not there.
Right, yeah. And don't forget that there are several thousand Northwestern students who don't live on campus.
That's what I meant.
But I
Because
mean,
they might have given up their.
no, I'm not, I mean, just all the time, they don't
Yeah.
live on
Not
campus.
in dorms, they might
They
live
live,
over here.
right,
yeah.
yeah, right, yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, but is there, like, we're obligated, however, despite the complications and the uncertainty that,
Yeah.
that result, we're
Those-
obligated to use the census data.
Yeah, those are the numbers we have,
Right,
right,
yeah.
yeah.
Then it'd be very interesting to see.
Yeah.
Mhm.
One of the
10 years
things-
from now.
One of the things that Councilmember Bell talked about walking the ward,
Mhm.
one of the cases I did find defines a contiguous district as one whose borders allow a person to walk all parts of the district without having to go through another district.
Right.
Who can do
Granted, that was a federal case, it's probably talking about the House of Representatives. But clearly, walking the seventh ward, you would have to cross potentially through one, or go around one, even go through five.
Well, I mean, you
But
can
it
get
is
to any,
possible.
Ward 7 is contiguous with itself.
Right, yeah.
It's not,
It,
there's
it,
no island portion of Ward 7.
it's just quite a mini, it's a mini
It's a
hour
long
walk to do the whole thing
Yeah.
in one go,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, so,
So,
back to Councilmember Ravel here,
yeah, so looking at the golf course part, which is,
which is, I'm pointing to it right
Right,
here.
yeah,
Nick,
which
if you
is-
wanna move,
so I see the golf course as being,
Nick, if you can move the mouse down to north of Noise, that, keep going down,
right,
close to the board, close to the fifth ward,
yeah. Anyway,
over to the right, to the
Right.
right.
yep.
Yeah, right
Yeah,
there.
so that,
That-
whole- yeah,
that-
that, where the green is wider is
Yeah.
the golf course. And
Yeah.
that's very much a community of interest for residents on both sides. When you leave the golf course and you're in the Arboretum area, and you've got McCormick and the canal, that's much more of a real division
Oh, I see.
Over
what you're saying.
here.
right here.
So where McCormick
Okay.
descends into Green Bay.
Right, yeah.
These portions are not as much of a community of
Right,
interest as
as-
those.
Exactly,
Got it.
yeah, right,
Got
yeah.
it.
And then the other interesting little island of Seventh Ward is this little civic center neighborhood.
Right.
I mean, Noyes Street is actually quite a division, I think. And the blocks that are north of Noyes are once again part of that golf course
Mhm.
community. But it would be easy to just carve that part off and put it in the Fifth
That
Ward.
one block south of Noise, move that from the seventh to the fifth.
Easily, but,
Okay.
and that maybe even.
Just that, and maybe even up to Grant?
Even, yeah, I mean, that whole little island there,
This whole thing
possibly.
could be moved to
I mean, I think they don't, I think they feel,
either the first.
they feel they're very invested in the golf course.
Okay.
But, so they are a community of interest vis-à-vis the golf course.
Yeah. But at least
But
this
that block,
one block here could be
I
easily moved to the
I
fifth.
think so, because they've got to focus on Ingram Park.
Yeah,
Yeah, so you're saying south of Noise, Leonard Place.
Yeah, right. I'm assuming it got moved into Seventh Ward for numerical reasons rather than,
I'm sure.
you know,
Yeah.
but,
yeah,
mhm.
okay. And what about on the north
Oh,
side
right,
of
for the First Ward?
of the first ward? And,
Yeah.
if I was
Mm-hmm.
totally consistent with my colors, then minus 591 should be in red. But if,
Mm-hmm.
what about the north border of the first ward at Milburn?
Yeah, that's a very, in that little area there,
Mhm.
nobody can quite remember, are they in the First Ward or the Seventh Ward? Where's the boundary? So, yeah, I would think putting the First Ward up to Milburn would,
With these two little,
not moving the,
Yeah.
having the 7th ward,
yeah. that's right. Oh,
actually, we got to, yeah, up to,
Yeah, up to
One
Mill.
of
so
those,
those 2 blocks right there.
one of those, isn't one of those long fields?
Yeah, Longfield is right. Longfield is,
Is one of the-
Milburn is on the north side of the
Right.
Longfield.
So one of those blocks is actually empty.
Right, yes, yep.
South of Melbourne, east of Warrington.
Because
Yeah, there's gonna be 0 population on one of
Right, yeah.
those.
And then just south of Longfield, of course, is Royce Moore School that doesn't have anybody living there either.
Right.
Although on Sheridan, there's a dorm.
Yeah, that's right. A new one that they built.
Well, the real new one is way on the other side of Sheridan.
Right.
But let's talk about campus representation.
Mm-hmm,
And this goes back to what Carl was saying.
mm-hmm.
Does it make sense to have the majority of campus represented by one council member? Or do we want to continue to have campus represented by multiple council members?
Well, given that there's the athletic facility
Mm-hmm.
up there on Central Street, that's not student dorm.
Yeah.
But it's a huge,
That's gonna
as we
stay
know,
7th floor.
It's a huge university presence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I guess the question is, I think many years ago, didn't the first ward include both sides of Sheridan? And so was there,
We'd have to go back and look.
and what was the reason for dividing them up that way? Because, if you look at the 7th ward, it doesn't make sense to have it be
I think
that
some of the
expensive.
reason, if my memory is kind of rusty from 2003,
Mhm.
there was a sense that there should be, that Northwestern should be represented by 2 aldermen.
Okay.
And just like the downtown, we have
Oh,
represented by
right.
3.
Mm-hmm.
And, but that certainly, you could take another look at that and,
Mhm.
and think of it differently.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, back at the time, there was, at the time, the relationship with Northwestern
Right.
was
It was rocky.
a little rocky. So having more aldermen,
Mm-hmm.
be interfacing
Mm-hmm.
with the university was seen as better
Right.
than just
right,
having a lone alderman.
Right,
you
yeah.
can't see the street, but in the first presentation that the committee put up was a map from 1990. And starting from here all the way to the lake, part of the first ward.
Mm-hmm.
I have that on my computer if we want to take a
Mhm.
look.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I can stop sharing if you want to share.
Well, if you think about, during my whole tenure on the city council, all the Northwestern issues have had to do with the athletic facility,
That's right, yeah.
so.
Well, but before that, there were
Right.
issues having to do with expansion across Sheridan
Right,
Road.
yes, right, and that could come up again, because, because they were talking about a dorm south of Sheridan Road there.
Mhm.
Give me a second. I'm gonna start my video so you guys can see my screen.
Same presentation, it talks about pre-90, it was only one ward in Northwestern.
Mm.
All right, a little bit of history,
Oh, this is,
Wow.
deep dive history. This is back to 1924.
Excuse me, I'd like to also mention, Alderman, that, remember, prior to 1993, there were 2 aldermen per ward as well.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's
That's a
right.
really good point, Tina.
yeah. So in 1945, there were only 8 wards. 1980, we are at full 9 wards. It's starting to look fairly close to what we have today.
Yeah, but look at
Second and
one-
fourth wards go east-west rather than,
Mhm. And look at one.
and
Yeah.
one is kind of compact downtown.
And the campus.
and the campus. 7 is, 1980 was more compact.
Right.
1992,
Mm-hmm.
things shifted. This is 92, yeah.
Oh.
And then this is where we are now, 2003, which is where we are now.
Mm-hmm.
But 5. Back there. 2 is big, 5.
Even further.
Is it possible to put the maps together? Maybe not this right now, but for the next meeting?
All these maps
Side by
are available online. Like if you go to that town hall presentation, that's what I'm looking at now. These maps are posted on the committee's webpage.
Well, I just meant when we're talking, I'm not saying that, you know, I'm just saying for you're recording this and
Mhm.
you want to talk about what was. A lot of things obviously have changed in the last 30 years. You have a lot more taller buildings, and you have Northwestern has made a lot of new dorms. So you have a whole new thing. I'm just saying when we're discussing things, maybe you can see what was and what
Mhm.
is right next to each other. Um, and when you're talking about a particular ward, so you can say, well, maybe you want to change something back to what it used to be, or might be helpful.
Yeah, that would be an interesting exercise. Agree. So back to tonight's meeting. And our Ward 7 discussion. Is there any more we want to talk about with regards to the 7th Ward? We talked about moving some of Ward 7 into Ward 1.
And some of 6 into 7.
We've talked about moving some of Ward 7 into Ward 5.
Mhm.
We've talked about moving some of 6 into 7, so, or maybe, if, in the context of Ward 7, moving 6 to 7 so that 7 will have some people to give to the
Right.
1st and 5th.
Right.
I think it's always very interesting to hear from a council member, about the communities of interest.
Mm-hmm.
I think your point, Eleanor, about the canal being a focus for people
Mm-hmm.
is something that I would not have known.
Mm-hmm.
But, having driven through that area a number of times, I can see,
Mm-hmm.
now that you've said that of course that would make sense.
Mhm.
It's like the park that everyone knows.
Yeah. It's particularly because of the Canal Shores Golf Association, and they have this volunteer ecological crew that gets out there and
Oh, yeah.
works.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But let me zoom in a little bit. So if we're talking about this section, right, we've agreed that
North of Noise,
this block south of Noise is,
Mm-hmm.
their focus is.
could go to the 5th Ward fairly
Right,
easily.
right.
But north of Noise, this is if that's a community of interest, it's thinking about the golf course.
Yeah,
So they-
but they're also, the Noise Street shopping area
Mhm.
is kind of their neighborhood
Yeah.
shopping area, so they kind of lean that way as well.
Yeah.
So
So even more of this
what
could
extent-
go to the 5th, or
Mhm.
maybe even the 1st if we want to move the
Right,
1st over that
yeah,
way.
right. Yeah, and then build up the 5th by going into the 2nd.
Right.
So just thinking about, residents who are sitting there blithely at home, not knowing that we're having this meeting tonight, and talking about them. So at some point, the proposed maps are revealed and they say, oh my gosh, I mean, what?
Yes.
Yes.
That's the
That's,
intent,
okay,
right? We have done everything we can to publicize this
Right.
process
right.
and engage members of each
Mhm.
individual ward in the ward meeting we're
Mhm.
designated for them.
Mhm.
Although we're not limiting public input, to whatever ward is on the agenda, you know,
Right,
come one,
right.
come all.
Mhm.
But
Excuse
the
me,
intent is for, Tina, just a second, please.
Okay.
The intent is for this committee, after the January meeting, we'll take our February meeting to put our pens to paper or put our mouse to davesredistricting.org,
Mhm.
draw some maps
Mhm.
with all this input rolling around in our brains
Mhm.
and see what we come up with. You know, maybe, hey, ideally, we can
Mhm.
come up with one map that is so darn good that nobody's gonna complain.
Mhm. Mhm.
Probably there's gonna be some trade-offs, and if, you know, there's gonna be a couple of different versions, maybe 2 or 3, maybe 4 that we wanna consider. We don't wanna do what we did 20 years ago, which was
Bigger and-
18
Oh, my
maps.
gosh, no, no, no.
It was absolutely awful.
Right, we wanna keep this, as simple as possible, which we have all agreed we wanna do. But the idea is to present whatever the finalist maps are, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3,
Mhm.
to the public, who will then have another few months, to contemplate them and give us some final feedback.
Right.
And do we then make some more tweaks? Do we reserve that right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Chair, I did want to say,
So, I'm sorry, Tina,
oh.
go ahead, Councilmember Burns, and then, Tina wanted to make another comment as well.
I was just gonna say that the Fifth Ward redistricting meeting is close enough to the ward meeting. I wouldn't mind doing a joint meeting. Because I would like to make sure that we have, you know, good turnout. So I'll talk to you more about that offline, but I wouldn't mind doing,
Okay,
you know, pushing the
Yeah.
meeting up.
That's a good idea, Bobby.
Yeah, or pushing
Yeah.
this the ward meeting, whichever direction, just to make sure
right.
the turnout. We typically get about 25 to 30 people in the ward meeting.
Yeah, and I would, if you want to do a joint meeting, that's great. I would be happy to attend the ward meeting just as chairman of the committee and have this conversation twice.
Okay.
If that works for you. I've made that offer to all the other council members. I'm happy to appear at a ward meeting to, explain this process.
Okay, yeah, we could do
And
that.
take
then.
input to that
I
context.
definitely want it at a ward meeting. But yeah, that works. So we can have the conversation. I don't know if it makes sense to have it twice because it's literally a few days away from it. We might,
Yeah,
we'll figure it out. I'll talk to you more about it offline.
okay. Yeah, we'll figure that out. If we want to convene the committee at your ward meeting, we'd have to officially notice that. But yeah, we'll do what we need to do.
We'll figure it out. Yeah.
All right. Councilmember Burns, anything else?
No, that's it for now.
All right, and Tina, you wanted to weigh in as well.
Yeah, so I have a comment that may be important. I'm not sure about the 7th and 6th wards regarding their TIFs, but as we know, there's a 5/5 TIF in the 5th ward, and if you're talking about you know, putting more money, it's based on the taxes, blah 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 blah, then the 6th and 7th wards have more money than going south.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, some of the residents may not understand TIF or whatever, and I think we're all kind of sketchy about it as well. But the more expensive the property or the worth of the area, and you putting that into 6 and 7 into 5, then you're going to have more money coming to that TIF. I don't know what TIFs are open. Alderman Ravel would have to say,
Yeah.
I don't know about that.
Tina, I could address that point. I think you've made a very good point about TIF boundaries might be something we want to consider as we're looking at ward boundaries. However, TIF boundaries are different, are totally separately defined, and we will not be changing TIF boundaries through this redistricting process. TIF boundaries will remain as
No,
they are now.
I'm, okay, I understand what you're saying.
Right, so
But
it's
if they're in
theoretically
the, if they're
possible, we
in,
could take something that's in a TIF, it's in the, West Evanston TIF, and maybe theoretically we move that from the 5th ward and it becomes the 2nd ward, but it would still be in the TIF.
But the parcels won't change is the point. The parcels are the parcels.
Right.
They'll remain the same parcels, whether it's the 5th or
all right,
7th. The parcels
Yeah,
won't change.
yeah.
well,
But, hey,
just
We'd have
to,
to go back and amend the TIF ordinance to expand it to include other parcels for that to happen.
well, I
Right.
don't know, you all like to amend a whole bunch of stuff, so I'm just saying.
Got it. But no, I think you mentioned TIF boundaries, and like we could consider TIF a community of interest, perhaps, or
That's
along those
correct,
lines.
because you're saying, you, I know you have a goal here, trying to do the numbers, but you're also saying you want everything to be fair and all of this. Well, if you're trying to pump up the 5th ward, uh, and make it equal to the other wards, then 6 and 7 makes sense.
Mhm. Okay.
As well as the 2nd ward. And that was actually the last comment I just wanted to make. And I don't, we'll have a whole meeting to talk about this. But again, I just want people to refer back to the goals in the packet, which are about communities, protecting communities of interest, which I think we need to have a bit more examples in that, in the parentheses there, because it's actually, it goes much further than that. Cultural,
Yeah.
religious, and language characteristics, communication and transportation networks, school districts, income levels, educational backgrounds. I mean, on and on, policy issues, and so I think there's a lot of reasons why, as I think Ms. Priscilla Giles said, and I think Councilman Ravel may have mentioned, to look at moving south in the 5th ward, but at the very least, we could talk about that more at the next meeting. I just want people to truly understand what goals we've outlined. And again, it does not include trying to address segregated areas. I would argue, that's probably a better conversation for our housing policy than how we redistrict. So I just wanted to make sure we reference the goals that we've already established for this process.
Right, and part of this process, this public engagement process, is to refine this list of criteria, these lists of goals, so that's what we're doing here. The list that we're looking at here on my screen right now is not the list we're married to for this process, but it's just a starting point for discussion.
But you also did say you wanted to make sure that you had 3, non-white. As
Correct.
you know,
Majority.
the majority of the people, Black people, are in Ward 5. And so a lot of wards are surrounding Ward 5, which you're not going to have the conversation till the very last, which is probably inappropriate because it was supposed to be talked about the last meeting, but you canceled it. And that is rapidly moving smaller Black population throughout the community. But it is surrounded, Ward 5 is surrounded by 7, 1, and 2, which is very important also.
Yeah, so Ward 5 is definitely going to get bigger.
I just don't see how we improve that. You talked about the diminishing, Black population, especially. I don't see how we improve that by adding 6 and 7. I do see.
So I'm discussing what Carlos mentioned earlier, which is regardless what you may say, I've been living here a long time, and I also have places in different wards, and I know certain wards get more benefits than other wards, and you can argue that, whatever. I know it. There's different policies in each ward, and I can say, because I have places in at least the 2nd, 4th, 5th, and 8th. I have 4 wards, and I know that policy is different in each ward. So that's why I suggest 6 and 7 go into 5 and become more equal, not just by the number, but you say you want in there, and you do have it in writing. You just presented the slide of 3 non-white wards. But so
Tina,
so
we've noted your input, and you know, as you're well aware, we're going to be having a series of meetings to talk about the other wards too. So you're definitely invited to those meetings. Unless there is somebody else who wants to weigh in specifically on Ward 7, I will look to adjourn this meeting. Is there anybody else who wants to weigh in the 7th Ward? All right, there being no further business to come before this committee, I will declare the meeting adjourned and look forward to seeing everybody next month.
Thank you.